To be discussing top tips for Canvas app makers. My name is Azure McFarlane. I am joined by my friends Geetha and Foyin, and we're going to give you our shiny features for how to improve your Canvas apps. We call ourselves the Charlie's Power Platform Angels, and we will be here to help you along your journey for building the best app that you possibly can. So a little bit of introduction. I said I'm Azure McFarlane. I am a senior consultant at Hitachi Solutions. I'm based out of the Washington, D.C. area, and I am head of global partnerships and growth for Women in Tech Group, Microsoft focus called Textilers. I'm also a Microsoft MVP, and you can find me on Twitter at amac_and_cheese.
Fantastic. Thank you, Azure. Hello, everyone. Good to be here today. My name is Foyin Olajide-Bello. I'm a solutions architect at Avanade, and I'm based out of Dublin in Ireland. You can find me on Twitter at FoyinB and also on LinkedIn at Foyin Olajide-Bello. I'm the co-founder of Textilers, working with Azure to support women in technology.
Hey, I'm Geetha Sivasailam. I'm an architect with Artist Consulting based out of Dallas, Texas, also a power addict and the founder of the Dallas Fort Worth Power Platform User Group. Super excited to be here with my partners in Power Platform Crime for doing this session on your top tips for Canvas app makers. And today we're going to be covering everything from app design tips to performance tips, and also how you can, have any error handling and troubleshooting embedded into your apps. And I will hand it over to Azure to kick us off.
All right, so our first is going to be your app design tips. Just waiting for the slide to load. There we go. Modern controls. So we've seen a lot of improvements across the Microsoft stacks for Teams, Office 365, et cetera, as part of Microsoft's Fluent Design system. And they're bringing these modern controls that help us with accessibility, ease of readability, usability, et cetera, into Power Platform. So for Canvas apps within the past couple of months, some new features have been released that you can enable now within your Canvas apps. So we would like to use these modern controls to enhance our app usability, performance, and accessibility without having to do many extra things. So there are 13 new controls, and I put that in asterisks because some of the ones that you see over all the way to the right-hand side of the screen, that some of these look a little familiar. So we've seen checkbox before in Date Picker, but there are a few more like the info button or, making clickable hyperlinks. These things used to be a little bit more complex to make yourself, and now they're built into the design for Power Apps. So you want to use these. The ways to enable this is within your settings for Power Apps, you'll have to go to upcoming features and enable the try out modern controls toggle. And then when you refresh, you should be able to see that new menu pop up when you click the insert button on your home screen for Power Apps. So some hot tips using these modern controls. There is now a tabbed list approach. Previously, when you had a very long screen for a Power App and you have people scrolling, you'd have to build in tabs potentially or extra screens. And now that comes like right out of the box that you can add tabs instead of having your user scroll a lot. The info button can be used now. I know I used to build a clickable button to open up an email to email IT if I needed help with something in the app. Now your info button is a control that you can add right there in your Power App without having to do all the workarounds behind the button. A few things that are coming soon, theming, per control theming, and then even things like the breadcrumb trail, if you're familiar with model-driven apps, to be able to like toggle back to a previous screen. These should be coming within the next couple of months. If you want to watch the Microsoft Power Apps blog, they should make the announcements there. Our second tip is using the containers drop shadow property. So this is newer. Previously, if you wanted to create a drop shadow on a card or anything else to the right, you would have to use CSS. And many of us would have to learn how to cobble that CSS together. And now this is a really easy way to be able to use it. You can add rounded corners for an extra fancy effect. So you can see in the left-hand side, it's as simple as configuring a few things with your font, and you're on your way. There is not a lot of documentation about this yet, so hopefully Microsoft will be updating this soon, but this is a really neat way to create a bit of a modern and a stylish look in your Power App with very little ease. And then you can add things into your container like you normally do, like fonts, images, pictures, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and the last one that I have for you is naming conventions. Super important. As we're creating objects in our Power Apps, it's important to make sure that we're using consistent naming conventions for our screens, for our controls, and for our data sources. It's going to make things easier to maintain. It's going to help with accessibility. It's going to make code easier to read when you have to come back and revisit this, or for somebody else. So one, consistency is key. Two, we want to rename their controls from their default. So, when you put in, when you first log into your Power App and you're creating a new Power App, it just says screen one, right? We want to rename our screen into something that is a little bit more descriptive. So for example, rename screen one to maybe home screen. We want to include the control name and screen. We want to use spaces and clear languages. When we are renaming controls like a label or a shape or anything else, we want to use a camel case for this. So we can see on the leftmost photo, we've got home screen, right? An indicator that it is a home screen. And then underneath, we've got groups, we've got labels, we've got icons, and it also has a 3-character descriptor, and then also what the control's purpose is, because it doesn't serve any purpose for you to name it something that doesn't make any sense, and then you still have to open up and see where the control is. The last thing that we want to do is also avoid special characters in our naming convention. So make sure that it's clear, concise, and only using alphanumeric text. And I think the last tip I have is if you're using the same control on multiple screens, you might want to add a suffix. So maybe if it's, like a label that you're using and it's for the home screen, you might want to put HS for that. So it's for home screen. That way across when you're reading your code, you'll know exactly which control that you're using on what screen. Okay, I think that's it for me. I am now going to hand it off to Foyin for performance tips.
Thank you very much, Azure. Amazing tips shared on the app design. All right, so let's talk about more tips on app design, or looking at it more from the performance perspective. So would say do not use more than 30 data sources. So as you start to build out your app and it starts to scale, you need to be sure that whatever data sources you're connecting to, you don't have more than 30. Anything above 30 makes your app start to drag. So what are some of the alternatives you can do? Well, you can think of creating another app and then transition people into that application rather than having all of the 30 data sources in that application. And then having your controls. Yeah, we all love controls, right? But we need to ensure that we don't have more than 500 controls in our application. And an example of how you can do that is shown in the screenshot below. So rather than having 4 image controls to lie on top of each other and then using the visibility property to show them, what we have done instead is to link have the URLs to those images directly. So that's one simple alternative way of reducing the number of controls you can have within your application. Then don't reference controls in other screens, because what that means is if you have screen 1 and you have a control on screen 1 referencing screen 2, when you load your app on screen 1, it means that the app needs to also load screen 2 because you have a control on your app that references screen 2. So that also reduces the performance of your app. There are many other ones, but we just thought to highlight these top 3 for you when you're starting to think about how you want to design your application. All right, so let's talk a bit about Power FX. Just looking into 2 of them, some things that you can do to make your app perform faster and in a more optimal manner is to use the concurrent function. Concurrent function is very important because what it does is it loads all of the data sources at once. But if you don't use the concurrent function, it loads them one after the other, which would make your application really slow. So on the start menu of your app, as you start to load your various collections and your various data sources, it's important to use the concurrent function because that helps the app to load a lot faster, as you can see from the image on the right, it all loads at the same time rather than loading one after the other. Then it's important to use collections. So let's use collections as much as we can. Let's try to cache the data that we want to use, our data source, in a collection. So what that means is the app doesn't have to always go back to the data source in SQL or Dataverse to get the data. When you have it in a collection, wherever it's referencing that collection in your application, once it loads the first time on start of the app, then as you scroll through the different screens, it just keeps loading from that collection. It doesn't have to go back to the source and then come back. So that makes your app perform faster. And also important to use the cache your lookup data. So you can see in the screenshot below, when you cache your lookup data, you can just keep pointing to it from the various elements that you have there. Finally, everyone's favorite topic in Power Apps Canvas, delegation. So we all know that delegation is something that we need to consider and think about when we talk about performance of our applications. Some examples of delegation, delegable data sources that we have is static data, Excel sheet data, Dataverse, SharePoint, SQL, Salesforce. We have a couple of them that are delegable data sources. An example of a data source that is not delegable is an Excel file that is stored within a SharePoint document library. And for those type of data sources that are not delegable, the maximum of records that Power Apps can work on at a time is 2,000. So you can see in the screenshots on the right, you can actually, the default there is 500. You can toggle that to 2,000, but that's the max that Power Apps can go. We also have some functions that are delegable when you combine them with some certain data sources, functions, and operators. So how we have a simple tip that we think will be helpful to you as you work with your galleries when you're creating your Canvas application. So sometimes you don't get the double blue line in your formula that shows that you have an error, that you have a delegation warning. But what you can do as a quick tip is go into the settings, which is shown from the screen from your app, go to settings, and then you can see this, and you change that figure to 1. And once you change this to 1 and you go back into your galleries, right? If your delegation is fine on those galleries, you should see all of the records. But if you have problems with delegation, you see 1 record. So you know that either you have an operator there that is not delegable, or you have a data source there that is not delegable, and you need to work on it. So this is a quick tip that can help you ensure that all of your galleries are fine in terms of delegation. But we have good news. Microsoft's coming at the end of June. More functions are going to be delegable. Some of the examples are what you see there. Today is today, now, update if. At the end of June 2023, all of these functions are going to be delegable, which is good news for all the Canvas app lovers. All right, so that's all around performance. And then I'll hand over to Geetha to take us through troubleshooting and error handling in Canvas applications. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Azure and Foyin, for those quick tips. These are tips that come in really handy when we as makers start getting our hands dirty with Canvas apps. Let's go take a look at some top tips for error handling and troubleshooting. So here's a special tip on an app setting that supports working with all those inevitable errors that crop up in your app. So have you ever wanted to build a try-catch framework in your Canvas app? That's where formula level error management comes into play. It's a setting that you can enable. It's an upcoming preview feature. So you'll be able to go to your upcoming features and look for formula level error management and then turn that on. And when you turn that on, there are a bunch of functions that light up, like the if error, is error, first error, all errors, and then also the apps on error property. The quick tip here is, for example, let's say you want to use the if error function. That can be used to test values until you find an error in the app or the app displays an error. So if it does discover an error, then it can return a corresponding replacement value rather than having an error, being in an error state. Or you could also stop execution of any consecutive actions. So one of the most common use cases that you end up having to do is chaining formulas together. Like this example that we have there on the screenshot, you have two patch statements, and then you could use your if error function to do an action and only continue processing your second patch statement if your first patch executes successfully, so that no other further processing occurs. Now, you do have the ability to also pass in a default result as an argument, so that even though there is an error, there's always a value that gets returned. Now, as part of this setting, you also have the feature of writing blank values to databases. So just something to keep in mind when you start playing around with this special setting with formula level error management. This next step is, comes in really handy for us, especially when we are, working with apps and wanting to debug and troubleshoot issues. That's one of the most common tasks that we do as makers. And, why wouldn't we want to view a stream of events using a user session and be able to diagnose and troubleshoot problems? The monitor tool can help you troubleshoot app issues faster. You can build more reliable apps. It provides a really deep view of your apps by logging all of your key activities that occur in the app as it runs, while it's running real time. And then you can look at the order of events that are happening. You can understand how your events and your formulas are contained in your app. And it can also be used for you to detect any performance issues, where those network lags are, and identify errors and solve those problems. So makers of Canvas apps can use Monitor to either view events while building a new app in your App Studio, or you can also use it to monitor published apps during runtime. All right, our last tip for this video is the Power Apps Code Review tool. This is a very powerful tool built by Microsoft to support all app makers to create high-quality apps. Now, you can conduct app reviews more efficiently against a customizable checklist of best practices that Microsoft's put together. And what that does is it gives you a 360-degree view of your app, which combines your app checker results, your app settings that you have set up, or any important settings that you've missed. And then you also have the ability to search your code and also view your formulas. Now, you can, get access to this tool by getting to GitHub, the repo. You can search for, the Power Apps Code Review tool, and you will see the GitHub repo pop up, or you'll have a blog post pop up, and you're able to download that tool. There are some prerequisites for it. The newest version of this tool uses the Creator Kit, so you do want to make sure that you've installed the Creator Kit solution for you to be able to start using the Power Apps Code Review tool. And then your account, or the account that you're wanting to use, or to install the code review tool, you want to make sure that you have at least the system administrator role or the system customizer role. And then you also want to enable PCF components on PPAC, which is the Power Platform Admin Center. And then it's all ready to use. All you need to do is just load your solution or your MS app file, and then let the review process go through its analysis, and then it's all ready for you to view. And you also get a score for how well your app has been performing, and how you have your formulas and your and how well it performs against that checklist of best practices. And that is it that we have today for all of our top tips here. I'm glad to have had the opportunity to present with these wonderful ladies. And we're excited to see what you guys think about these tips.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Bye.
Bye.